You've probably seen videos of Joe Rogan, Jocko, Cam Hanes, whatever influencer it is that you follow, and they're doing a cold plunge. So that inspired me. I started off with cold showers and I committed to doing them for 100 days. And strangely enough, it turns out that I liked them and I wanted to get into actual cold plunging, but it's super expensive. So I turned to YouTube and Facebook Marketplace to try and make my own out of a chest freezer. Now, in my searching, almost all DIY cold plunges seemed to just silicone the seams of a chest freezer, use an inkbird to control it, we'll get into that later, and basically call it a day. So I started down that route and I learned a lot very quickly due to the condition of my freezer. I picked up a chest freezer on Facebook Marketplace and it wasn't in great condition and the enamel that covered the metal was flaking off. At the time, I had no idea if this was a big deal or not. And without doing a ton of research, I siliconed the seams like everyone else on YouTube, and then I covered the bad spots, really the whole bottom, in liquid Flex Seal. Things were going great and I was plunging regularly. I found a few websites and Facebook groups dedicated to like converting a chest freezer into a cold plunge, and I quickly discovered that I definitely put the cart before the horse. Please take my word for it, slow down, follow the links that I'm gonna have in the description, and definitely do it right the first time. First, you're gonna wanna find a chest freezer that can fit a human body. I've seen a ton of posts on Facebook where people call up somebody selling a freezer and they're like, can a body fit in there? But yes, that is what you're looking for. I'm about 5 foot 10 inches and 165 pounds. I guess that's about average.
They're not scrawny, they're nice.
And I was looking for something deep enough to get the water to my neck when I was like sitting comfortably. So I was really looking for internal dimensions that could fit my shoulders. Most freezers will show you the cubic feet and the dimensions. So sit down with a tape measure, figure out what would be comfortable for you. You'll want that free space on either side of your shoulder so you're not like rubbing against the side. And then it's up to you, kind of what you want for your legs. But I'd say get that water up to your neck, figure out what depth you need for the legs, and then make sure your shoulders are clear. So once you get the size in mind, let's say you've got your chest freezer, you're gonna wanna seal the freezer so that it's watertight and safe long-term. And after hours of research, it turns out that there's some people that have great success simply running a bead of silicone over the seams and running with that for years. But sadly, there are also people, a lot of people, that report failures of that method. Now, this could be user error, but these websites and Facebook groups have formulated a tried and true method that seems to have a very high success rate. It is DIY intensive, but yields good results long term. They use an epoxy called JB Water Weld or JBWW, you'll see it a lot of the time, on all of the seams. And then they coat the entire interior surface in a non-toxic epoxy called Pond Shield. This is sort of the route I ended up going, I'll get into that. The Flex Seal ended up having a small failure, and it was probably due to my lack of surface prep. So I decided to totally start over and try to do this, what I thought I was doing right. So I scraped out all the Flex Seal, I sanded off all the sealant that I had, and I prepped the surface. I sanded everything with 60 grit sandpaper. Then I used a JB epoxy. It wasn't the water weld, it was a different one on all the seams, but I still think this will work. You should definitely do the JB water weld and not be a moron like me. If you have exposed metal on the interior due to sanding, like you actually sanded through, or because your freezer has an all metal interior, you need to use a self-etching primer prior to applying your Pond Shield epoxy to that metal surface. So after the epoxy dried just on like all the seams and joints, I sanded everything. I applied my self-etching primer just to the metal areas that had the exposed metal. I waited an hour, and then I tried my hand at applying the non-toxic Pond Shield epoxy. That stuff was tough to work with. I live in Southeast Louisiana and it is summertime, which means the humidity is not gonna get below 60% for months. And the temperatures during the day are gonna be 88 to 95. And Pond Shield did not like this. I started outside, the coats were too runny. I also found wide variance between the Pond Shield kits. I ended up with 3 kits and they all acted differently. Even if they were in the same environment, it didn't matter. One kit was runny, but went on easily outside, while another kit ripped my roller to absolute shreds Also outside, same conditions. So I moved everything inside for cooler temperatures and much lower humidity. And even still, one kit went on perfectly, while the problem kit, I'll call it, ripped another roller to shreds. So if your roller stays intact, you can just apply multiple coats without sanding. If they're kind of close enough together, I'd say 1 to 10 hours, I think is what the instructions say. But with bits of microfiber roller all over the place, I had to wait a day for everything to dry and then sand all that microfiber out. And then I started again, but this time I used a 9-inch roller, and this roller that I got was specifically meant for epoxy, it claimed, and it applied the product beautifully. I have no idea. Most people in the groups say use a high quality microfiber roller. That's what I started with. And then, like I said, it got ripped to shreds. This epoxy roller did an amazing job. I also left a little epoxy kind of in my mixing container, just a little bit at the bottom, so that I could come back with a chip brush as the epoxy was kind of slowly getting hard, and I could scoop it out and kind of use that in light spots, depending on how your epoxy is handling. So after a few more coats, I was finally done. You wanna let your freezer cure for 7 days prior to adding water. That is not what the manufacturer says. They say 24 hours, but all the experience on the internet says just wait a week. Also, the drain plug, I epoxied my plug in place, because all the experienced folks online say if you don't do that, it's gonna lead to premature failures. There's not a good way to get a seal down there. So put the plug in, epoxy over it, and just be done. And then you can get a transfer pump to empty your freezer, or you could just siphon with a hose or something like that. So now you have a sealed freezer. So you're good to go, right? Everything's great. Wrong. How are you gonna keep your water from becoming a solid ice block, right? This is a freezer, you're gonna turn it on, it's gonna go down to 0 degrees, it's gonna freeze out. The freezer thermostat is meant to keep things frozen. So now comes temperature controllers. I was sent two by Inkbird that I'm testing out. What I generally will say is that you need to look for the Inkbird that actually has the temperature probe that's meant for aquariums to be submerged at all times. Or if you don't, and you have the stainless steel probe, then you need to silicone that thing and then put it in the water. Again, Inkbird sent me my temperature controller, but they do seem to be trusted by the general DIY chest freezer community. Again, everything will be linked in the description below. The Inkbird allows you to plug your freezer into the controller. You set a temperature on that controller, and the rest is just managed for you. You have that probe sitting in the water and you're good to go. The controller will then turn on and off the freezer to keep the temperature exactly as you want it. You can keep it at 70, 60, 50, and colder. So now we're done, right? Well, not quite. How do you plan on keeping the water clean? So most folks that I've discovered, they run a circulation pump with a filter, and I'll link to what I'm using below. And they'll either run chemicals, ozone, UV, or kind of a combination of all that to keep the water sanitized. I'm running a pump with a filter, and I also have ozone, and I don't take particular care in getting clean prior to plunging. Like some people shower off, I do not. And I can get 4 to 6 weeks before my water gets pretty cloudy. So either drain and refill or hit it with chemicals, basically. So check the links provided for more information on keeping your water clean. It's all gonna be there for you. So that's where I'm at, but let me leave you with a few warnings. Chest freezers are not meant to support the kind of weight that you're gonna add to them with all this water. Most of them have to be supported on the bottom, either with foam or like a rubber stall mat, or some type of wooden frame. Again, check the website for all this kinds of information before you just jump in. People have made all the mistakes that you're about to make, and you can learn from them. Also, do not get into a freezer that is plugged in. They are not designed for this, and they can electrocute you. There's all kinds of issues. Unplug it before you get in every single time. Another tip is don't cover your freezer. They're transferring heat from the water, and they're usually transferring it to their outside walls. And those walls, especially on mine, they can get 130 degrees Fahrenheit, 140 degrees Fahrenheit, because they're gonna have to run for a long time to get that water nice and cold, and that outside's gonna get very hot. So do not cover your plunge. A lot of people think they can insulate the outside, that'll help it be more energy efficient or whatever. You're just gonna kill that thing prematurely because you're not gonna be able to dissipate the heat, which is very counterintuitive. All right, I think I've covered all the lessons that I've learned. I hope this video was helpful if you're attempting to get into cold plunging. Thank you so much for watching Break It Yourself. As always, don't forget to thumbs me up, and we will see you next time.